Hello, and welcome back to Places Please, Richard's Theatre Podcast, Galway Theatre Festival edition. Can you believe that I'm on episode 12 already? I'm a bit shocked by how much content myself and my husband Connor have been able to produce over the last little while. And I'm very, very thankful. Unfortunately, this is the final episode of the Galway Theatre Festival edition, not the final episode of the podcast. Imagine if I just came out and said that. And I just want to thank the Galway Theatre Festival for being so open and willing to allow me to talk to these artists, especially Noel Minogue, for kind of allowing us to talk to them and get to know more about their shows and why their show is important. I think it was a really beneficial thing for me and hopefully for you as an audience as well. And today's guest is no different. I want to introduce you to Max Hafler, whose show The Heart Ward is currently playing at the Galway Theatre Festival, and he's going to tell us all about the show and how a personal experience inspired this piece. Enjoy.
Bro.
There we go. Hiya, Max.
Yes. Hi, Richard. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I would love for you to maybe take the stage and introduce yourself to the podcast.
Okay. My name is Max Hafler. I'm a theatre practitioner in the kind of widest sense of the word. I started out as an actor. And then after I was acting for about 12, 15 years, I started to move into writing. And then eventually, when I came to live in Ireland, I started directing and teaching. And I carried on writing as well. So that's really my trajectory of in like one sentence. And I wrote this show. My show is called The Heart Ward. And I wrote this show because last year I was seriously ill in hospital and I had something called endocarditis. And endocarditis is kind of heart disease. It's pretty serious, actually, although it turned out to be fairly benign, even though their treatment was not benign. It was, I mean, a lot of the piece is about, it's about having to advocate for yourself in hospital and how difficult that is and how you have to do it. Because as soon as you kind of sink or you stop asking questions, then kind of anything can happen. It's not as if, nobody's trying to hurt you, but it's, to a certain extent, you are responsible for your own body and your own experience, whatever happens. And this is very difficult. And when I was a child, sorry, I'm talking about the piece really, but when I was a child, I was seriously ill in hospital as a baby. And I have something called spina bifida occulta, which is what it sounds like, occulta meaning secret. So you can't really tell that the person's got it necessarily. Some people you could. But what's interesting about that is that the process, what the spina bifida does, because it affects your spine, is that it starts to, it messes with your organs, with your functions. So it creates a whole series of other problems. So when I was a child, I was in hospital for a long time, on and off, through my early childhood. And of course, in the hospital, then I had no agency. Children were treated, when I was a child, children were treated as they weren't really developed people. So they didn't really they had kind of feelings, but those feelings would just go away. Oh, well, so that hurts, so they'll scream, so okay, well, they'll get over it. And it was incredibly traumatic.
I was actually just really interested. So you've taken something from your childhood and something that's happened to you very recently, and you've kind of brought them together to kind of, they're woven into the piece almost.
Yes, they are woven into the piece. And that was, I've often wanted to write about my childhood experiences because I feel that, I feel people either don't know about what it was like to be a child in those days. It's not like Call the Midwife where they're so lovely to the children. And it was, and it wasn't cruel, intentionally cruel, but it wasn't good, really. Not from my experience anyway. And so when I was in the hospital with endocarditis, and they finally told me, as happens in the play as well, they finally told me, I actually got endocarditis, and you're going to have to stay here for 6 whole weeks and have intravenous antibiotics for every 4 hours for 6 weeks. So that includes when you're in bed, at night when you're asleep, and they had to come and do it. And that the thread of that story. Well, first of all, I was horrified, because I actually thought I was leaving the hospital this particular day, and then they came and told me I wasn't. And so I thought, I've got to do something. I've got to do something. Whenever I've been in a crisis in my life, art has really helped me. Creativity has really helped me. And as it did when I was a child. And I thought, I'm going to write this down. I'm going to write some poems. I'm going to do some, and that's how it started. And I didn't really want to put my childhood stuff in it, but it gradually came in because I was dealing with it, I was going, I mean, there were certain procedures they wanted to do, which reminded me of when I was a child. And, I had a lot of conflict with the doctors. And I tried to be as charming as possible under the circumstances. But I did I refused the treatment eventually. Until they fixed it. They fixed it and they did something. I'm not going to tell you because that's part of the story. The story of the play.
Don't tell me. I want to go see it. Yeah, no spoilers.
So there were now, along with that, I had this thought that, and this is a really interesting, bizarre thing. When I was a baby, I was operated in Great Ormond Street Hospital for Sick Children, which was an incredibly famous hospital in London. And they had to do quite a serious operation. And Great Ormond Street Hospital, I don't know if you know this, but J.M. Barrie, the author of Peter Pan, gave the royalties from Peter Pan to Great Ormond Street Hospital in order that it could keep going, because there was no national health then, so it was struggling to survive. And the first play I was ever in was Peter Pan when I was 10. So it was really amazing. And the local paper made this incredible kind of fuss about it. You can imagine, like little boys, pays back the hospital, and, which made it feel even more important.
Yeah.
But, so that's kind of, so a kind of character of Peter Pan is actually in the story as well.
It's a lovely connection as well for it to kind of connect in as well about, the story of Peter Pan as well, talking about the boy who doesn't want to grow up, and that kind of style as well kind of ties in a little bit as well to
it ties in. It actually ties in a lot to me, because I'm very. I have that attitude, I've been told that anyway, and then there were lots of other things as well, like Peter Pan is about immortality. You could live forever. He lives forever, but he doesn't really exist. Whereas when you go to hospital and you're facing, serious stuff, then you're really, you're really in trouble, and you're kind of facing your own mortality, really, which is, quite something. And so there is a polarity there, as Michael Chekhov would say. There's a polarity between, wanting to live forever and having this openness and wanting to and be realistic about your life. That it doesn't go on forever. And
did you find that really hard, Max, in terms of taking the time after and allowing yourself to process kind of what had happened, and then writing a piece that is inspired by that? Not only that, but also something from your childhood as well. Did you find that difficult?
No, I didn't. In fact, I wrote the pieces that I actually wrote while I was in hospital. I wrote a lot while I was in hospital. And I even made little films. I had to kind of keep going with it because it was so, especially once the weeks stretched on, it was really dreadful. And I thought, I've got to make something of this. I mean, that was my determination to do that. And I thought there's something really important to say here about, about the hospital system and all of that kind of stuff. So besides my own experience, I didn't think I was going to bring in, there isn't an awful lot of my childhood experience, but there's enough. And I kind of, and I, without going into the details, I had a pretty dreadful childhood in many respects. I had some very supportive people in my life that were great, but I equally had some awful people. And one of those awful people, my stepfather, appears in this play only once. And it's really horrible watching that scene. So I've never written anything as autobiographical as this before. I mean, I've written a lot of plays, and and I've had some success at doing that, and I've written a lot of plays in poetry, like Albion Tower was written in rap. Melting Doves, which was a long time ago, also was written in. There were huge chunks of it in techno, with techno backing. Alienation, which I did with the Youth Theatre, that had a lot of poetry in it, and some of the RTE radio stuff I did as well. And I really feel that poetry really has a way of going into places that like a more naturalistic approach wouldn't go. And it's, in a way, it's more real to what actually happens, because you're in the hospital, nothing happens for ages, and then suddenly you're off to a procedure, and then you'll start thinking about the past, and you start thinking about what's going on. Poetry really enables you to slip from one world to the next really easily, in a way that realistic drama doesn't do so, if I don't think does really as effectively. So that's what it's about. And I'm hoping that people will really take something away from it, not only about advocacy and, you know, the importance of that relationship between doctors in particular. The nurses are heroes as far as I'm concerned. They are amazing people. There are a few exceptions, but mainly they're amazing. And those shit that, if you don't mind me saying, the shit they have to put up with. And the abuse and and there's quite a lot of that in certain section of the play. That one of the people in particular, you call them all the names under the sun, and especially if they were women.
Can you tell me, Max, about your cast that you've got involved?
Okay, yeah, I can. So my cast are Daniel Gannan, who I've worked with a long, long time and known for years and years and years. Jana Lindström, who also, she works in arts and health herself, but I knew her first as an actor, and we did a couple of shows together, and Patrick O'Malley, who's been to a lot of my Chekhov workshops that I'm still running and still do. That's Chekhov Training and Performance Island.
There you go. Yeah, so get it in there.
And Laura Marie Demar, who is a student at NUIG, a current student. And so that's my cast. There's 4 of them, but there are about 30 characters, and they have a lot to do. Yeah, so it's an ensemble show. It's not. It is serious, but it's kind of. Somebody said the other day, it's darkly whimsical. I wouldn't quite call it that, but it has a kind of, I don't know, a kind of mythological quality. In addition to all this realistic stuff about, you know, cannulas and operations and all of that, there's something else about it. And I'm hoping that people will take away from it not only the stuff about advocacy and all of that, which I think is terribly important, and how the hospital system kind of works, you know, from my perspective, from my limited but quite extensive perspective in terms of how long I was there. And I'm hoping that, but the play is ultimately very redemptive. Somebody said that to me, who was a hospice nurse in America, a friend of mine. And he said, you know, I've read this, he said, and it's actually not as dark when it's performed as it is when you read it. But he said, I just read the end of it, and I just felt really good. Because, of course, I get better. Oh. I got better. So something good happened on a kind of material level. It was just a very difficult experience, but it's an experience that actually, if I say it changed my life, it sounds a bit pretentious, but it did kind of do that, because it made me think about, well, first of all, it allowed me to augment that early experience. That was a really useful thing. Because I don't think I would have been able to do that otherwise. It was really, really fantastic.
Yeah. I'm so intrigued by it, Max. Like, it just sounds so important. And I think that's what art should be, it's an important piece. I think you should tell everyone when it's on and where they can get tickets to it.
Okay. It is on May the 8th and 9th okay, in the O'Donoghue Centre. And I have to remember this. And it's on at 8:00 on Friday. That's the 8th. And on the 9th, it's doing two performances, one at 2 and one at 8. And at 3:10, there's going to be a kind of discussion group about, well, I'm hoping we're going to talk about some of the advocacy issues and stuff like that. I hope people are going to be into talking about that, but we can talk about anything really. And then there's a performance on the 8th. There's two things else to say about it. Oh, and you get the tickets from www.galwaytheatrefestival.com. That's, I think you can still get tickets on the door. I haven't asked anybody, but I presume you can. And there's two things I would say in addition. I would say that it's not for under 16s, or certainly not for under 15s. There's quite a lot of swearing and cruelty in it. And the humor's very dark. So I don't think I have a friend I made in the hospital, and he has two children. And he's coming to see the show. I said, "Don't bring your kids.
Bring them,"
because his kids are like 10 and 12. I think. I said, "No, there's too much swearing and too much, etc." I said, "I don't think." And the other thing is that I would say is that it's in a kind of storytelling style. So, they kind of are the characters, and then they narrate, and then they're the characters again. And then they narrate. That's kind of how it works. It's just like somebody's in there telling you a story, but it's actually presented as a play. That's
amazing.
That's the idea.
Yeah, and that sounds great.
Good.
And it works. I'd say it worked really well for the style that you're telling as well. So I think that's going to be great.
I think it was, and it was funny because when I wrote it, I wrote the poems. I didn't think about, was I going to put this on? Or I thought, well, maybe I'll send it to some publishers and see if anybody's interested. And then I was persuaded by my colleague in Chekhov Training and Performance Ireland, Declan. He said, I think, do you think you might make it into a play? And I said, well, I wouldn't want to change the fact that they are poems. It's not an episode of Casualty. It's different. And anyway, so that's kind of how it evolved. And then I did change some things. I had to change some things eventually, but just pronouns, I to he, and so he waits in the hospital bed, instead of I wait in the hospital bed. Those kind of things. And no, it's good. It's been brilliant. And one thing I will say, and I'm sure Jenny said something like this as well, is that the kind of redemptive power of art is really incredible. Really, it's so incredible to me that I can, obviously I felt it when I was writing the things because it was really helping me get through it. But I became kind of very enriched, and I started to kind of open up to people. And in a way, I might have thought, I don't want to talk to that person because they're not like me or whatever. And I found that gradually, it's like being in a war, I suppose, or a time of crisis. And people, and it was writing the things. I said, why is he doing that? Why is that happening? Etc. And I just think it's amazing. And that's continued to happen, which is amazing. So as we've been working on it, I feel like it's still evolving. I mean, we have a soundscape by a musician called John Daly, who lives in Sligo, and it kind of opens up the whole thing into this kind of much more almost mythological area, certainly in certain parts of it. So it's great. I'm so far still loving doing it.
Only a couple of weeks left now until it actually happens.
No, and hopefully, I really wanted to go on and go somewhere else, because, but we'll see what happens. That situation. It's like, well, maybe that'll happen, maybe it won't. One has to be philosophical, I suppose.
Fingers crossed, anyways. But Max, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and for sharing your show. And I'm very excited to see it. So we'll chat soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Max. You've been listening to Places Please, Richard's Theatre podcast, hosted by me, Richard Brown. Audio engineering and editing by Connor Gill. Stay tuned for a sneak peek of our next episode.
My favourite thing about touring is when you go to a theatre and you know everyone already, people welcome you back, and it's kind of like seeing old friends, and like this person follow spotted me last week and they've got, in Irish you say they've got good crack, they've got good banter. You're like, oh, it's going to be a nice week because we're back with friends.